Good morning. It's 10 o'clock, so we'll begin. My name is Chris Lawton. I'm the Director of Knowledge Exchange here at Farm Credit East. I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar on cash field crops in the 2014 Farm Bill. We'll cover risk management, including the ARC PLC decision. The webinar will now begin, and thanks again for joining us today. Here's a few technology tips to keep in mind while we're viewing today's webinar. All attendees are muted throughout the presentation to minimize background noise. Every once in a while, be sure to tap or move your mouse so your screen doesn't go to sleep during the presentation. There will be ample time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. Questions can be text chatted in at any point during the presentation, and they will then be asked of Art Barnaby at the completion of it. To send in your question, click on the red arrow to expand the GoToWebinar control panel. That's usually on the top right-hand side of your screen. You will then see a text box where you can type your question and send it in. Finally, a recording of today's presentation will be available on farmcrediteast.com/webinars for playback at a later time. If you're having trouble accessing this recording, please contact Christy Schmidt at 1-800-562-2235. And again, that will be up following the presentation. I will now turn it over to Jim Putnam, who will moderate today's webinar.
Good morning. Welcome, everybody. On behalf of Farm Credit East, we're very pleased to have you on board for another excellent learning opportunity here this morning with Dr. Art Barnaby from Kansas State University, who's going to walk us through the new commodity program provisions of the 2014 Farm Bill. We don't often have folks online with us from Kansas, so by way of explanation, I'd say if you want New York cheesecake, well, you go to Manhattan and get New York cheesecake, and if you want the best lobster, you go to Maine for that, and you wouldn't think of going to North Carolina or something. And if you want the best cheese in the world, well, you go to Cabot Cheese, which is located here in New England. And so when you look around for experts on who can kind of unwrap and explain in very useful terms the federal commodity programs for corn, soybeans, wheat, and other crops, you don't shop in the Northeast. You go look in the Midwest. And when we did that with some of our farm credit friends out there, the name that rose to the surface was Dr. Art Barnaby, and he is an extension economist on the staff of Kansas State University, and has occupied that position for a number of years, has a number of honors here. I'm not going to recite all of those and give the full resume here, but I noticed that Top Producer Magazine has listed him on the Brave Thinkers, 30 Leaders Who Made a Difference, and also on their list of 7 economists and bankers who challenged the status quo. I didn't know bankers ever challenged the status quo, but I guess in their list they do. And we're very privileged to have Dr. Art Barnaby this morning, and so with no further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone and the screen over to him for presentation. We'll let him run through that, and as Chris said, encourage you to text chat your questions in, and we'll try to take as many questions as we have time for. Art, go ahead.
Well, thank you for that introduction. I am talking to you from the campus of Kansas State University. We are located in Manhattan, Kansas, and for those from New York, yes, they do advertise themselves as the Little Apple. People from New York always find that one interesting. First up is our disclaimer. I think I need to be clear. There are still decisions that are going to be made. There will be surprises, and there will be decisions that are made that are reversed. So some of this is an ongoing thing. One of the things that will happen is that we do follow the commodity title on our webpage, agmanager.info. That's Kansas State University's webpage. costs nothing to be on that, and the address is on the handout material. The other point down in the right-hand corner next to that K-State logo is the slide number. You have more slides than I'm going to talk about today. I gave you everything, but if you have a question about a specific slide, you might reference that so that I can back up to that slide number and we can talk about it if there's a question about it. The other point is I'm going to focus mostly on the commodity title. But this is is a piece of a much larger picture. You look at this not only from the standpoint of crop insurance, which in the policy world everybody talks about subsidy. In my view, it's misnamed. What crop insurance really is a cost share program. The government pays a share of their premium. Farmers in some cases have paid premiums for years and collected no money, unlike commodity programs, which typically transfer money from the Treasury to the producer. So commodity programs and crop insurance are really very different in how they work. In addition to that, that's only part of the story. You have to produce a crop, you have to sell a crop. And this story came from Bloomberg, caught my attention because when we work through the commodity title, you'll discover very quickly which is the better program depends on your price expectation. This particular farmer is expecting very low prices on soybeans because he's not only priced this year's crop but next year's crop, and he can do that and remain in a fully hedged position, assuming that he bought the revenue protection contract, which has the harvest price and will guarantee that inventory to offset that hedge, or if you prefer the forward contract route, guarantee that you'll have the dollars to replace the bushels to fill the forward contract, or in this case to offset the hedge. So that's all part of a bigger package. And finally, a lot of times what it comes down to, when a crop doesn't have insurance coverage or a commodity program, often it makes it more difficult to get financing. So all of these tools are part of a total portfolio for managing risk, including lending risk. That's all part of the package. So with that in mind, let's focus on the commodity program. First of all, these commodity programs are simply derivatives of the option market, or they're derivatives of crop insurance. So if you understand insurance and you understand options traded in Chicago, then you are there. You understand this program. The price loss coverage program is the simplest one. It is one of your choices. It's similar to what the countercyclical program that it replaced that had target prices. We now call those reference prices. If you trade options, you call them strike prices. Works exactly the same way, except you don't pay a premium. You get a price. In the case of corn, it's $3.70. If the national average price is below $3.70, you get paid the difference times your program yield. It's all tied back to the program yield and program acres. Base acres. The other alternative, if you don't take PLC, is the agricultural risk coverage, ARC. It's similar to the acre program that it replaced, except the yield is measured at the county level rather than at the state level. But the crop's reference price is tied to the marketing year average price of the prior 5 years. That MYA price was high relative to the current market. In fact, the current market is low enough that the 14% deductible is gone. So if there's any kind of yield loss at all, just a little bit below average, it would trigger payments on this program. The thing is, this is very much like the GRIP contract, or area risk crop insurance contract. That contract's been primarily sold in Illinois. There's not a large number of those contracts sold nationally, period, but where there have been contracts, primarily Illinois is where most of them are located, and Indiana. Those two states have most of those contracts. It's based off of the expected county revenue. If the county revenue is below that guarantee, you get paid. Well, a little bit difference here. They're setting the county revenue not based on crop insurance prices, but on the marketing year average price, which is a USDA price published by the NASS group, which is part of USDA. If the key with this program is it has a 10% stop loss. You can't get paid more than 10% of the expected revenue, period. And because of that, it really limits the coverage. However, if you eliminated this stop loss, I think you would see a lot of farmers in the Corn Belt actually drop their insurance coverage and simply rely on this, because it would provide coverage very similar to the area risk plan, and of course it would have no premium. The issue there would be the cost would be really large, because not only would you get an 86% guarantee in Illinois, but you'd also get an 86% guarantee in higher risk states like Texas, for example. There's also the supplemental coverage option. This is an actual insurance contract. It's sold by insurance agents, backed by insurance companies, and only backed by the federal government through the reinsurance agreement. You can add this to your existing crop insurance coverage, and it depends on your level of crop insurance. If you have 80% crop insurance coverage, then SCO won't provide a lot of protection. If you've got 17% crop insurance coverage, SCO will cover 16% of your deductible, so it becomes fairly sizable under that scenario. The catch is you are not eligible to buy SCO if you participate in either ARC or stacks. So if you're in PLC, you're eligible, or in the case of a few people who are in no program, and that can be for a number of reasons. The primary reason would be they have cropland that has no base on it. I seem to run into those folks. If you have no base on your acres, then there is no commodity program, period, end of story. So, and you can't build base. We'll get to that too. The stacks is a replacement for ARC and PLC for cotton, we have a little bit of cotton in Kansas, but not very much. This is not a program that I've kept up on very much. Probably need somebody from the southeast if you really want to talk about cotton. These are the new reference prices. Wheat is at $5.50. If national average price is below $5.50, you'll get a payment. Corn is $3.70. Grain sorghum is $3.95, and that's really interesting. $3.95. The sorghum is a substitute for corn. It produces the same amount of ethanol as does corn. It doesn't quite have the feeding value of corn, although the sorghum producers would take issue with me on that. And corn typically sells for a higher price than sorghum, yet the strike prices for the PLC program are reversed. I asked why was that the case. The answer was sorghum is such a small crop nationally that it affects the USDA budget very little, and it simply flew under the radar screen. Nobody questioned it, and they got it put in. Didn't make much difference on the budget side, and so it went through. The loan rate is still in place. In most locations, though, if we get prices this low, commodity producers, in most cases, cannot survive these kind of prices. So I haven't paid a lot of attention to the marketing loan. It's still there, but hopefully we don't trade that low. This shows you a diagram of how all these choices fit together. It starts off with commodity enrollment. You have an option to update your base acres. Now, if you've got wheat base and you go in and say, gee, I'd rather have corn base, just reallocate my base to corn. Well, you can't really do that. What it amounts to is the period from 09 through 12, you had to actually plant corn on that wheat base in order to be eligible to change your base from wheat to corn. So it still is tied back to what you planted during that period. There will be some updating of base, and I'm anticipating where it's possible farmers will move wheat base to corn. You also have an option to update your payment yields. Every farmer in America should do this. You don't get very many chances to update your program yield. It's been a while since they've been updated. For the most part, yields are higher. Even if you had a crop loss during the measurement period, which is, I believe, 08 through 12, even if you had a crop loss during that period of time, it's not a simple average. So don't assume just because of that you won't end up with a higher program yield than your current one. If for some reason the math works out after you do this exercise and you don't up your program yield, you don't have to take it. You can keep your old yield. So I don't really see any downside other than there is some paperwork involved. On the other hand, you get to keep that for future use. Such as if the land sells or if it changes tenant, etc., you may want that higher program yield because we don't know what the next commodity program might look like. Maybe we won't even have a commodity program, but I still think that's a good thing to do. At that point, assuming that you have base acres, you have a choice between enrolling in ARC and PLC. First, going down the ARC side, you have a choice between an individual and a county. If you select individual, and enrollment is by farm serial number, so let's say you got 3 farm serial numbers and you enroll all 3 farm serial numbers into the individual ARC, then it will combine all the revenue from all 3 farm serial numbers and count that against the guarantee. And by revenue, I mean all crops growing on that farm serial number. So if you have corn, soybeans, and wheat all growing on those 3 farm serial numbers, they will aggregate the revenue from all 3 crops. As you can see right away, that's going to get really complicated, and the other complicating factor is that's how they're measuring loss, but then that loss is converted back to your actual program crop. You don't get paid based on what you actually planted. Payments are based on your base acres and the crop that base is tied to. So that keeps the program decoupled, and that's necessary for international use, or at least it'll be argued that it's decoupled. The simpler choice is the county route. In this case, if you enroll, you can enroll 1 farm serial number in the county, and if you have, for example, wheat base, and the county revenue triggers based on the wheat numbers, you get the payment even if you didn't plant wheat. Your payment's strictly tied to your base and the crop that base is tied to. So again, a decoupled program. You can also selectively put different farm serial numbers in different programs. So you could have 1 farm serial number in the individual, you could put 1 in the county, and you could put 1 in the PLC. If you put any of your farm serial numbers in the price loss program, then you're eligible to buy the additional coverage under the crop insurance title, which is SCO. This is an area triggered plan, but it's tied back to the individual's deductible, which is tied back to your individual APH yield. There's only one choice, one level of coverage. It's 86%, but it stops at wherever your crop insurance coverage is. So if you have 85% crop insurance, this is only going to provide 1% of your coverage. If you have 70% crop insurance, then this will cover 16% of your guarantee. The other choice is, for example, there is no commodity enrollment for one reason or another. You're still eligible to purchase the supplemental coverage. So as you can see from this, it's going to be quite involved at FSA. It's going to be a lot of paperwork. If you go the individual route, you're going to have to go back to FSA every year, reporting yields and making sure everything gets identified with proper serial numbers, etc. So it'll be quite involved as far as getting things done. Okay, here's the outline of the price loss program. There's no, it's farm level, there's no yield effect. It's all strictly by price. The reference prices, or if you prefer target prices is what we used to call them, they're set by law. They don't change. You can update your program yields based on the period 2008 through 12, and I strongly encourage everyone to do that, even if you don't go into this program. If the price is below the reference price, you're paid the difference. That payment per acre then is paid on 85% of your base acres, and 15% of your base acres do not collect. You don't actually have to plant the crop that you're collecting this payment on. It's strictly all figured from USDA numbers. It's all just tied back to your base. It's a one-time decision for the life of this farm bill, so if you select PLC, then you're eligible for the SCO coverage. If you take the alternative, you're not eligible. There is a payment limit of $125,000. It's a Title I program, as all these programs are, but they've taken all these different payment limits, which we had before, collapsed them into a single limit, and your spouse would probably qualify in most cases for another $125K. Versus SCO. SCO is in fact crop insurance, and so there are no payment limits on it. The agricultural risk coverage is the alternative, which you can either take at the county level or the whole farm level. The reference price is the prior 5-year Olympic average prices, and by historical standards, the prior 5-year corn price is quite good, as is the soybeans, and that makes this policy look very attractive for corn and soybeans. We'll talk more about that as we go through here. The benchmark yield is the expected county yield. The farm level yield, how all that's going to work, particularly when you're rotating crops or you're planting a crop you've never planted before, somehow FSA is going to have come up with a farm yield, and then they've got to convert that all back to what that means as far as getting payments from the crop that your base is tied to, not the crop that you planted. So I figure this is one of the holdups in getting sign-up, is how do you program all that. Now, if you, this program came from Montana, and if you're a Montana wheat grower, you're growing wheat, and then next year you summer fallow, and next year you grow wheat. Well, all you've got is wheat history. You're planting wheat. It's pretty straightforward. The farm level guarantee is not going to look a lot different than crop insurance. So, but they're planting the crop that the base is actually tied to. When you get into these rotations, that becomes a real administrative nightmare for FSA. Benchmark revenue is simply that reference price times the benchmark yield, and I'm going through the county version. And you get 86% guarantee. If the county revenue, which is the county yield times marketing your average price, is less, you're paid the difference, pretty much like a revenue guarantee. The payment then is on 85% of your base acres. So if it works out that it's a $10 an acre payment, you get $10 an acre times your base acres times 85%. If you go to the farm level, then you only get paid on 65% of your base acres. Congress really didn't want farmers to go into the individual, and they're telling them that by putting in this smaller payment rate. So you have to keep that in mind. Again, it's a one-time decision. The bottom line there, the last bullet point, maximum payment, 10% times that benchmark revenue, which is way back up at the top there. That stops out the payment, and that really limits the coverage of this program. Take away that benchmark stop loss there, and this program would probably replace crop insurance for a large number of corn producers in the Corn Belt. At least that would be my expectation. We worked through some examples, or have so far, of how this might work. The first thing that comes up is you have to determine the 5-year Olympic average price from the previous 5 years. We are tracking those for wheat, obviously, and it's almost complete, and will be complete on on June 30th of this month. And at that point, there will be really no more estimating. These are the estimated weights, came from K-State. Those weights will all be published on June 30th, and we'll know the exact value of those. So it's a weighted national average price. Right now, I'm at $6.90. That number will be final in a couple of weeks, or less than 2 weeks, I guess. And at that point, we can determine the revenue. You look at those 5 prices. You can see right away the lowest price there is the 550 number. That will be tossed out of the Olympic average. So you throw out the high and low, average the remaining 3 years. The high price is obviously going to be the 777. So it'll be this year's price plus the price in 11 and the price in 10 will be averaged. Next year, the 570 number will drop out of the average. So because the 570 number will drop out unless the next year's price is lower than 570, which I'm almost certain, at this point I don't know that we will be in that position. Actually got wheat prices going up on the strike price as a result of the way the Olympic averaging works. By the time we get to sign up, which I don't anticipate now, I'm hearing maybe January. A lot of these numbers are going to be final. We won't have to rely on forecast. In any case, if you take the 661, which is the projected price used to set the wheat guarantee, and you deduct the 14% deductible, that means at 568, any price below 568, and you've got an average yield, which is the most likely outcome, then prices below 568 will automatically trigger payments. That's only an 18-cent difference between that number and the 550. That's why under PLC, when you're looking at corn and soybeans, wheat has the greatest chance of paying under PLC because those prices are very close together, or relatively close together. We also estimate next year's price based on deferred futures plus estimated weights, and when we continue to track those on our website and update them monthly. This is probably of more interest to this group. This is the corn numbers. We do exactly the same thing. A few more estimates here because the marketing year doesn't close until August 30th. So we have 3 estimates in there, but it's pretty close to complete. The weights were estimated by us. They'll be final on September 1st. And posted, it would be October 30th, I guess is when it actually be published. In any case, you got the same story. The low price is that 09 year at 370. Actually, that 370 is the price was actually lower than 370. There is a minimum price that goes into the Olympic average, and you'll notice that that's the same as the reference price under the PLC program. So the ARC program has the minimum reference price set in the PLC program as its minimum price. But the next, the years that are going into the next average are unlikely to be at that level. So again, we could see this strike price actually go up in the next year or two. When this was all being debated in Washington, the assumption was that the price used to set this ARC guarantee would decline over the 5-year period, and it well might on the back end of this program. But in the first year or two, it looks like right now it may go the other way. Again, by the time we get to sign up, as I tell farmers, the longer it takes for them to come with sign up, the better, because the less price forecasting is going on. That will determine ultimately which one of these programs pay, if they pay. They may not pay anything. Same story, if after you take off the 14% deductible, a price below 458 triggers payments with an average yield. So any yield below that triggers payments. With an average yield, any price below 458 triggers payments. To get payments from the PLC, you need a price below 370. That's an 88-cent difference. Because of that big price difference, that's why I think a large number of Corn Belt farmers will select ARC over PLC. The numbers suggest to me you're more likely to collect from ARC. Secondly, a lot of Corn Belt farmers have 80% coverage or greater, and if you have crop insurance coverage at 80%, and you certainly can buy at that level, then there's not much benefit from the SCO program. where the SCO really provides benefits in areas where you don't have coverage greater than 75%, or it simply becomes unaffordable. Okay? Same story, we keep tracking the prices. This is an example I run through how this program might look with a corn situation, comparing ARC and PLC. You notice I've got different yields there. I've got 140, 150, 145. The ARC yield is the county number. Wouldn't expect that to be the same as the farm. The price loss coverage program is tied to the individual's farm program yield, but that's based on that period of time of if it was updated 09 through 12, and that's a different time period than the crop insurance yield, which is based off of the individual's producer's yields for the prior 10 years. So I wouldn't expect these numbers to be the same. If it did, it would just be accident. In this scenario, I said I suppose prices go down, and I've got prices going down to 322. You'll notice that, and I thought I had an underline here, and I don't know that I know how to do a pointer on this particular program GoToMeeting, but if you look here under payment rate per acre, under ARC, it's $184.91 an acre. That's what that payment would have been had you not had the 10% stop loss. Because of that 10% stop loss, it stops the payment out at $73.92. That's 10% of the reference revenue, which is $739.20. That is 140 bushels times $5.28. And you get paid that on 85% of the base acres. So in this particular example, with prices at 322, your PLC and your ARC payment are about the same. That's a kind of a critical number. At roughly, if you think corn prices on the national average price is going to drop below 322, then PLC at that point will start to pay more than the ARC program. And effectively, there's no stop loss in PLC. If corn prices go to $2, it will follow it all the way down. You'll get the difference between $3.70 and $2, which is what, $1.70 a bushel times your program yield. There is absolutely no limit. And once you hit the loan rate, you're still going to get paid. It'll just flip over and you'll get paid under the loan deficiency payment program. And of course, you're eligible to buy SCO if you're in PLC. I also show that this would trigger a crop insurance payment. This is, I got the coverage in at 85%. As I said, you can buy higher levels of crop insurance so that there's really no benefit coming from the SCO, and many Corn Belt farmers are already at this level. So when we look at those numbers, the biggest payment there is from the crop insurance program, and that should not shock anybody. This farm bill was advertised as most of the safety net is going to be in some form of crop insurance. This example shows you from the numbers perspective why that is expected to be true. We also track soybeans on our website. Big difference in the price here between the ARC program and the PLC. You need soybean prices below $8.40 nationally to trigger any soybean payments. Based on where the market is now, I think soybeans has the least chance of paying under PLC. So I anticipate a large number of people will take the ARC program on PLC. It's a $2.19 difference on the price side. So for that reason, that would be my expectation. There are other crop insurance payments. There's a 60% plug is still there. There was some question if that had been eliminated. In the Farm Bill debate, they were going to allow you to have a 70% yield plug. What this means is if you had a crop that was zero yield for some reason, hailed out, drought, whatever, hurricane, in that case, you could replace that low yield with 60% of what's called the T yield, which is kind of is the RMA's version of a county yield. They were talking about raising that to 70%. In lieu of that, they decided to go with rule number 2 here, which says that if the county suffers a 50% yield loss, then farmers may exclude that year's yield from their APH history. and they're really clear about this in the legislation and divide by 9. Now, this has become quite controversial. I made the statement in Texas based on some of what I've been told in D.C. that while this is in the law, it was not going to happen on the 2014 wheat crop, the 2015 wheat crop, which we'll sign up for this fall. And the reason being is that RMA had so many other things that they have to get done, like the SCO. They simply didn't have the staff to get this rule in place. I said that in Texas and and it beat me home. I'm not sure exactly what to say on this rule. I'm still thinking it probably is not going to apply this on the 15 crop. I'm not sure we'll see it until 16. Doesn't matter probably in your area, but it's a big deal here in Kansas. If you've been reading anything about the wheat crop, it's really bad in Oklahoma, not very good on the southern border of Kansas. As we go north across the state, as the wheat crop moves north, though, I think the wheat will get better as they move north. That's my expectation. But there are areas, there will be counties that will beat this trigger. It's an area that I'm working on right now, and I can tell you it's not just Kansas. Even Iowa has counties that meet this 50% test because it's 50% of that county's prior 10-year average. So in these high-producing counties, well, you start with a higher 10-year average. So it's all relative to that county's experience. So you do have 50% yield losses in some of those Corn Belt counties where maybe you think you wouldn't. This is a pretty rare situation, though. The whole idea behind this rule was it's a catastrophe year, and therefore there's no reason to believe that farmers' productive capability has shrunk, so why reduce his insurance coverage because he had a loss that would be clearly outside of his control. Thinking more of it like you would with a hurricane, where government has typically helped after you see the bad experience, or following a tornado. If you've been seeing those on the news, we've been having a lot of those late in Nebraska here in the last day or two. The other thing is the enterprise unit that separates irrigated and non-irrigated corn in the same county. That rule has been delayed till 2016, and nobody has argued with me otherwise on that one. You are required to be in conservation compliance to purchase crop insurance. That's a new rule that was not required before. Most of the farmers here in Kansas are in conservation compliance. Most farmers and farmers that have been in the traditional commodity program were already in compliance. Where this comes up is crops that didn't have a commodity title. Fruits and vegetables, for example, have crop insurance as an alternative, but they weren't required to be in conservation compliance. Maybe they were, but they weren't required to be because they weren't in the commodity program. Well, now they have to be in the commodity program in order, have to be in conservation compliance in order to purchase crop insurance. One of the things I've thought about is how to compare rates. And, the other point is that volatility is what really drives premium costs. It's not the market price that sets those revenue guarantees. It's the volatility number that really drives premiums. The enterprise unit, I think, could be made greater use of. The USDA really discounts the premiums if you're willing to go the enterprise unit, where you put the whole farm into a single crop guarantee. So you have a corn guarantee for the whole farm up to the county line. When you get to a new county line, you get a new enterprise unit. So it's only within the county. It's all acres in the county. They really discount the premium. And as a result, you can move to higher coverage levels, which gives you a higher effective put price, if you will, inside your insurance contract. To keep the number simple, let's say we've got a $5 February average price setting the revenue guarantee. If I buy 80% coverage, 80% of $5 is $4. That means if I produce a yield that equals my APH, then any price below $4 triggers a payment. If I buy 70% coverage, 80% times $5, that's $3.70. It then requires a price below $3.70 to trigger a payment, assuming that I produce a yield equal to my APH. And then, of course, you have the option to add the harvest price. In most cases, I think you will find it is worth the extra cost. Here's a wheat example of the kind of money difference we're talking about on premiums when comparing enterprise units with optional units. I could go 70% optional units and get $196 an acre coverage at the 70% level, or I could raise my coverage to 80% under an enterprise unit, get $224 worth of coverage, and in fact pay less premium for the $224, $11.74 versus $12.81. You have to think a little differently about this. You're not so much worried about an individual field being lost. What you're really worried about is the total revenue for the whole operation. At the end of the day, my guess is your lender probably doesn't care which field produced the dollar, but you need the total number of dollars to meet loan repayments, etc. Also, if you're on the market side, which we just discovered, you've raised the strike price. You've also increased the amount of bushels that are going to be guaranteed at replacement value, perhaps allowing you to further expand what you're doing on pre-harvest pricing, or in some cases when you get really high volatility. One of the things I've done in an all-day workshop is go through a simulated case study showing farmers how you can actually sell the options out of your insurance contract. With low volatility, it doesn't pay to sell the options. With high volatility, it does. If we get back into that again, that will be something to look at. This is the supplemental coverage option. This is, you can buy this if you're not in the ARC program. So the key is not to be in the ARC if you want to buy the supplemental coverage. It is a county triggered program, or county yield. What controls that? If you buy a yield-only crop insurance guarantee, then your SCO is yield-only. If you buy revenue insurance, then your SCO is revenue insurance. If you buy revenue protection, which includes that harvest price, then you have revenue insurance with a harvest price under the SCO. So that's what controls that. And it guarantees a portion of the deductible in your insurance contract. So it is the difference between 86% and the percent crop insurance coverage. So if your crop insurance is 85%, then you only got 1% coverage here. If you're buying 70% crop insurance, you've got 16% of your coverage is here. It's 86%, same guarantee for the entire country. 86% minus, you go through all this math to come up with the percent county payment factor. So we're going to work through the math today, but the formula's there on your screen. You take that percent county payment factor times the farmer's liability, and the liability is the actual deductible in your insurance contract. It's at that point, it's no longer tied to what happens at the county level. It has some. It doesn't have any payment limits, so for big farms that could be an issue. The other thing is that you cannot sequester these payments. Unlike the commodity title programs, if the Congress comes up short of money, and this has already gone to court, so it's been accepted, they can reduce the amount of payment that's due and through sequestration. That can't be done with crop insurance payments. Payment is coming from a private insurance company, which is reinsured all over the world, a lot of it in Europe or offshore, and then ultimately reinsured by the federal government. The point is that the private companies would be sued immediately if they tried to reduce the amount of payment. Now, they may or may not get reimbursed for the government's share of the loss for the federal government. They probably wouldn't be in the business next year either, but in any case, you don't have to worry about that happening. The maximum payment Your stop loss is at your crop insurance coverage level, at which point it takes over, and of course it's a one-time decision. Here's an example which you can work through, showing an expected farm level revenue of $750, county at $725. The difference is the farm has a higher APH than the expected county yield. You know, the old saying is all farmers are above average. Okay, all the farmers I talk to are above average, and therefore I always use farm yields that are greater than the expected county. But nonetheless, those two numbers probably will not be the same. I'm assuming the farmer in this case has an 80% guarantee. When you work through the math, you come out at the bottom there. There is a $19.50 payment coming from crop insurance, another $22.24 that would come from SCO with an 80% guarantee. You'd only have 6% of your coverage that would be covered. Okay, so here is the math formula to come up with what we came up with on the previous page. In this example, it works out to a payment factor of 49.43%. The portion of the deductible that's covered here for this individual farmer was $45. So you get 49% of the $45, which gives him a payment of $22.24. I should also say that is no, in addition to no payment limit, it's paid on all planted acres, not just base acres, and it's paid on your crop that you actually planted, not what your base acres are. Okay, so here's a graphic representation of what we just talked about. $600 of the coverage is provided for the revenue protection. There's $45 being covered by the supplemental coverage, and then there's a $105 deductible that's still in place. You're not triggered off of the individual farm numbers. You're triggered based on what happens at the county level. The county has a 49% loss factor, and that's applied to your $45 to get that payment that we just went through. That's with 140 bushel county yield, which means close to the average, and a price decline. So if you had 70% coverage with the same county yield and the same price decline, you notice that the county payment factor actually drops, but it's times a bigger number of $120. So in this case, the payment is the same whether you had 70% coverage or you had 80% coverage, which shrinks the SCO. The thing is, in order to get all the SCO, the $120, the loss has to be greater than what we're showing here. So in this case, the SCO payment is the same because you haven't hit the stop in the SCO with 80% coverage. Now, if you do hit the stop with the 80% coverage, that's when the payment starts getting bigger. Here is the 70%, but I got the yield dropping to 120 bushels combined with a 430 price. As a result of that, the county trigger now is at 92%, almost 93%, and it's multiplied times $120, so you're going to get a much bigger payment in this case than with the person who had SCO and 80% coverage. In fact, they would be stopped out at $45, or if you remember, that was the liability, and so $45 is the maximum payment with 80% coverage. Here, the maximum payment is $120, and you're getting almost all of it. Reason is because you have less coverage under the revenue protection individual crop insurance contract. So in the Corn Belt, where a lot of people are at 80 and 85, they're not giving up a lot of coverage with the SCO. Whereas in the Great Plains, that may not be the case. In this scenario, I've got the situation where they have 70% coverage, but they took SCO and their individual guarantee without the harvest price, and the price went up to $550. As a result of that, exact same yield as I had on the previous slide, but because of the higher price, it eliminated the county trigger, and therefore you collect none of the SCO, solely due to higher price. Works just like the revenue contract does. Now, if they had purchased it with the revenue protection with the SCO, which means the SCO also has the harvest price, first of all, the coverage jumps to $132, so it actually increases the coverage, and you can see when you work through the math, it is now triggering a payment 20% of that bigger number. 20% times 132 would be the payment. The other question is, what does this cost? Nobody knows. But I've been doing some estimates. This is a case where the revenue protection rate is roughly, the revenue protection contract is roughly 7%. That is before the government pays its share of the premium, so that's the total premium. At that level, this particular farmer would be paying $26 an acre. For this location, I was estimating the SCO premium would be something over 20%, which will look really high and is high. The reason I would expect this is because the SCO is the first dollar of coverage. It's covering the dollars above your insurance guarantee, and the first dollar loss is always the most expensive. And so I'm expecting those rates will be in this range. Now, the government is going to pay 65% of that premium, so keep that in mind. But again, you can pay premium and you may not get a dime. In fact, when I evaluate this as part of a bigger total risk marketing package, I always treat crop insurance as a cost because I assume you're going to, in most years, produce a normal crop. That is the most likely outcome. In any case, I think this number is probably in the ballpark for that reason. However, most farmers are probably not going to see that. What farmers are going to see is this number. The cost per acre would be roughly $3.10 an acre, and they're paying $26.17 an acre. So if the farmer paid premium, then this is after the government share of the premium, the farmer is paying $26 for his crop insurance contract. To add the additional supplemental coverage is going to cost him $3 an acre. You know, a lot of farmers will probably just say, okay, let's add the extra coverage. So they probably won't actually look at the premium rate itself. Most people are going to react to what is the cost per acre, how big I have to write the check. Will farmers elect ARC over PLC? Well, I don't think there's much chance and we'll get to the numbers and you make your own decision on corn and soybeans collecting under PLC. More likely they're going to collect under ARC. And in the Corn Belt, you can afford to buy the higher crop insurance coverage, so less protection coming from SCO anyway. PLC is unlikely to play on 2014 wheat, which is going to be really interesting out here because yields are probably in some counties are going to be low enough that it will trigger ARC payments, even with higher prices, but the PLC is simply not going to pay. So do you take the ARC payment this year, and with the possibility that on the back 4 years, PLC will pay a lot more on wheat than what ARC will, and if you're rotating crops and you want crop insurance, SCO coverage on the crop you actually plant, you're not going to get it. So it's going to be a real interesting test. Is the issue here really risk management, or is it simply which one of these programs is going to pay me the most money? Because of higher ARC reference prices, that's what makes corn and soybeans, those two crops, have a better chance of collecting under ARC than PLC, but there are no guarantees. You may not collect anything even with the numbers that are there from ARC, so it's possible this program is going to cost a lot less money than what the forecasts were. Higher yields or higher market prices reduce the ARC payment. In the particular location I was just in Texas, they had an excellent wheat crop in that particular location. As a result of that, their county yields are going to be high enough, their individuals, that they're not going to collect from ARC, and the price is high enough, the PLC is not going to pay either. So at least on the first year, I know that part is not going to collect any, those counties aren't going to collect anything from the program, the commodity title program. Anyway, here's the key. Do you believe USDA forecasts? These are the forecasted numbers from USDA for corn. As you can see with corn, they got corn prices dropping down in the $3.30 range. Once you get down in that level, you start triggering sizable PLC payments, and you're getting to the point where it flips over and PLC pays more on corn than it does on than does the ARC program. And the reason is ARC has that 10% stop loss. Key question: do you think corn prices are going this low? If you think it is, and you're going to go PLC because you believe it's really going to go there, remember my first slide? The guy was selling not only this year's soybeans but next year's soybeans because he's sure prices are going down. You really believe this price forecast? You should be selling your 14 crop right now, sell 15, 16, and even 17. You can do that on the board right now today. Same story on soybeans. If you think prices are going to get this low, actually on the soybean, the fair terms from these estimates, but point being, if these swing prices from USDA, PLC will not trigger at all on soybeans. So my computer wants to update itself. Oh, crazy Microsoft. Anyway, the point is, none of those prices drop below the PLC trigger. So if those turn out to be correct, then it would never pay. FAPRI is a group at the University of Missouri, similar to CARD at Iowa State, and the Policy Institute at Texas A&M University. They estimate a number of macro numbers, a lot of the same things that USDA does. And their forecast, in my opinion, are probably more realistic. At least farmers I talk to, they think these are more realistic. If you believe the Missouri forecast, you see you've got corn there remaining above $4. If we stay above $4, then PLC is not going to pay. ARC may or may not pay. That will depend on yields. It will depend on yields at that point. As you can see, based on their forecast, the crop that's most likely to collect payments is wheat. But I can pretty well tell you it's not going to pay in the first year. Now, on the back years, it may well pay, but not right now. This is a matrix that shows these different payouts with 140 bushel yield, PLC at 150, and the 150 is the program yield. So if I got a county yield of 140 and I hit the average of 140, that's expected. Then at a price below 460 ARC, you're right at the trigger point. I also looked at what happens when price drops down to 320. At 320, you've got prices that drop, or excuse me, at that point, you've got a situation where ARC pays less than PLC. PLC is paying $75. The ARC program is paying $74.90. And if you have yields greater than the county average, 30% higher, that payment drops down to $61.74. At 140 bushels and a 460 price, ARC doesn't pay, but if the yield is 10% below the average, ARC will kick in a $64 payment. Again, PLC pays nothing. So even with higher prices, reducing payments, etc., you still end up with bigger payments under ARC than you do PLC unless that price drops below roughly 320. At 320, it flips over and PLC starts to pay more. So even though you've got this combination of price and yield with the ARC program, it still pays more unless you get down below 320. That's kind of the critical number. We are estimating those prices. You take off the deductible, and so with wheat, we need a price below 468 to trigger payments. With corn, we need it below 460 to trigger payments. By contrast, the reference prices are much lower than that. Having said that, ARC looks more attractive in corn and soybean country, particularly where you can buy the higher level of crop insurance. FAPRI still expects half of the corn base to go into PLC. I think I'm probably right on the numbers. I think they're probably right on the participation. Here's why. The PLC is the simpler program. It is the simpler program to explain to your landlord. And there's a lot of research out there that shows that when people, not farmers, but just anyone who is confronted with a number of alternative choices, they will typically pick the simpler choice. And PLC is the simpler choice. You talk to your landlord who may live in Florida and you tell him, hey, this ARC program I think might pay, might not pay. He says, well, how's it work? Well, if prices are lower, we'll probably get a payment unless yields are really high. On the other hand, we could have some pretty high prices and have yields go down, and we would collect payments. And, you know, about halfway through your story, the landlord's throwing up his hands and said, I don't understand anything. You got something simpler. When you say, well, we could go into this PLC program, not sure it's going to pay anything, but if the price drops below 370, you get paid. Well, at least I understand that. Below 370, I get paid. Above, I don't. Sign me up for that. And the kicker here is both the landlord and the tenant have to agree. If for some reason you cannot agree, and I think the landlord's going to have to sign too, because it's a 5-year commitment, and the tenant might not have control of that land for the next 5 years. Landlord could sell it, his heirs could sell it, who knows. So if you can't agree, then you are eligible for no payments on the 2014 crop, assuming that payments are actually generated. And in 2015, you automatically go into the PLC program. So there's a real big incentive for landlord and tenant to agree. Because of the simpler argument, I think that's why you would go that route. Where does SCO fit? Well, I think more of it's going to be sold to the Great Plains than anywhere else because you have a lot of farmers who have coverage less than 80%. Now, that's going to depend on where they set the county yields and what kind of premiums you're looking at. It also applies to farmers that have a lot of acres that don't have base. It also applies to really big farmers who are over that $125,000 payment limit. They're not getting, as a percentage of the total farm income, they're not getting much help there anyway. And for that reason, this is crop insurance with no payment limits, and therefore I think it's going to have a greater interest. One of the things, though, when people, even in the Great Plains, tell me they can't afford the higher crop insurance coverage level, if they'll rerun the numbers and accept the enterprise unit, which is by county, I should add that, oftentimes you find you can afford the higher coverage, and it is aggregated to the whole farm level, but you have to remember the SCO, the trigger that actually triggers payments, is aggregated all the way to the county level. So if you're happy with the county trigger, why wouldn't you be happy with an aggregated farm trigger anyway? Something to really think about. The other question is, argument on the PLC is if you're really, really super risk adverse, you would pick the PLC because if the bottom falls out of the market, the payments will be bigger and you really need the help at that point. Truth is, I don't find many farmers that are risk averse. It's hard to be a farmer and not be willing to accept some risk. If you want a job that has very little risk, you should go work for the government like me. Get a check, same amount every month. Okay. This is New York, Orleans County. I looked up the data there to see how much variability there really is in corn yields at the county level. One of the frustrations with doing this work is you've got missing years in the NASS data set. 2009 was one of those. There was no yield reported for this particular county, so I substituted in the yield for the district. The rest of these years are the county yields based on a planted acre basis. What you see reported in the press is usually on a harvested acre basis, which is higher. You see the yields do vary somewhat, but 20% is about as large as you see here. As I said, again, this is moving on a 10-year average too. So you need a yield loss at the county level, probably in that 20% range, before you would actually trigger payments to SCO. So you need to keep that in mind when thinking about SCO2 as to whether or not it fits. This is the crop insurance history for this particular county. This is the RMA data. Comes off the website. As you can see in this particular area, you had a pretty bad crop in 2000 with a 318 loss ratio. 2011 had a 215, but you have a lot of years where it's been extremely good, and when you aggregate across that whole 20-year period, the aggregated loss ratio for the 20-year period is at 71 cents. Now, what that means is that's total premium divided by total losses. In terms of actual farmer paid premium, the total indemnity payments are 3.6 million, and farmers paid 1.2 million in premiums. So in the county, you're ahead of the premiums, but you're not at the 1.0 loss ratio, which is the target. Just show you the difference in risk. This is southwest corner of Kansas. This is county level wheat yields. Same analysis I just did for New York, but you see a lot of losses. In fact, there's one year there where we actually had an 83. Well, that's a different county. In Hamilton County, it's just a little further west. It's right on the Colorado border. You can see there in 13, the county yield was 83% below the average. In Finney County, it was 40% below the average. So the numbers can get really big. They can go the other way too. You can see some yields in there. In 98, for example, Finney County had a yield that was 55% above the average. Over in Hamilton County, it was 87% above the average. So that's real risk. This is an example of the comparison of I'm planting corn on wheat base, and this will be the decision made out here. First of all, these yields are going to look really low to you, but these are dryland corn yields. Everything is relative. So, and these are yields that are set by RMA because in this case, I'm assuming this person has no history of planting corn on this wheat base. Here is his program wheat numbers. I assume the price went down to $5.25 on wheat. Cash national average price $4.25. Crop insurance futures prices, and these numbers tend to move together. So at the end of the day, I calculate the ARC payment, which is what the person would actually be paid because it is a wheat base. It works out to $11.70 an acre. He is not at the maximum payment rate, which is $21.75 an acre, or $11.71 per acre after you go through the 85% coverage. So under PLC, because the price has fallen far enough, I actually trigger a payment there. But I take the ARC, I insure the corn crop at 70%, and with a slightly below average yield and a low price, I generated $2,522 payment for a total of $3,692. Now, the alternative, if he gone into PLC, I would have gotten a much smaller payment at $743. I would pick up the crop insurance payment. Nothing would change there. But because I went PLC, I could add the SCO coverage. And, of course, in this case scenario, it generated an $8,600 payment and some change. So now my total payments are nearly $12,000 versus $3,700, which is going to create an interesting trade-off if I know going in that ARC is going to make me a cash payment on wheat for the 2014 crop, but I have to give up that payment and take the PLC, which is, I can tell you right now, extremely unlikely. In fact, I can almost guarantee it's not going to pay on the 2014 wheat. In order to get additional crop insurance coverage on a crop that I'm actually planting, which is where my risk is. Now, you might say, well, why don't he just buy some coverage greater than 70%? In the Great Plains, there are counties that don't offer coverage above 75%. That's the first. So if they don't even make the offer, there's nothing to do. And when they do, you have to be careful you're not paying more in premium than what you're getting in coverage. In other words, RMA can price you out of the market. So a number of factors that you have to consider. As a result, we are going to see some decision aid models. Texas A&M is building one, be online. It's a full-blown simulator. It will generate the probability distributions and the whole 9 yards. Here in Kansas, we're working with Oklahoma State on a simpler version of essentially a spreadsheet which farmers can download. You'll be able to do that anywhere in the country. Oklahoma State has the grant money, and that's why they are the lead. We have contributed some money into development of that approach. We think there's a significant number of farmers that will be looking for a simpler what-if program where they can change their own assumptions and see what the impact is on the various outcomes and payments. But that's the kind of thing you're going to have to look at. Can't build base. I say that 100 times. Can't build base. You can reallocate base. You should update program yields. ARC payments are not based off of program yields, but you still should update those. Program and yield update is supposed to happen this summer, but as far as actual sign up, don't expect it until late, maybe as late as January. Enrollment is by farm serial number, and you can do something different on every farm serial number. Landlord and tenant have to agree. ARC is expected to provide a separate guarantee for irrigated and dry land in areas where it matters. Farmers have, again, they can plant change. It's by farm serial number, okay? Enrollment is. SEO, if you're a beginning farmer under 10 years, you increase your subsidy by 10 points. That's a big deal. So any farmer who is new should definitely look into that. SEO is sold by agents. It's insurance. You get paid quicker. But bullet point number 6, farmers have to pay 35% of the premium cost in the case of SEO, where the other programs require no funding from farmers. There are some conflict of rules. RMA requires all acres to be insured. However, if you enroll one of your farm serial numbers in the ARC program, on those acres you can't buy crop insurance, and yet the RMA rule requires you to insure those acres. Somebody's rule is going to have to give. That decision, I think, will have to be made at the secretary level. My bet is that the RMA rule gets adjusted. Bottom line, if you think you're going to drop your insurance coverage and rely on ARC, 92.5% of your expected revenue is not covered. 98% is all the coverage you effectively have. That's after you go through the percent of base acres to get paid. You have to be fully based. It could even be worse. So this is not going to replace your crop insurance coverage as far as protection is concerned. Higher crop insurance prices favor ARC, or higher crop prices, I should say, favor both crop insurance and ARC. Higher prices simply take you out of PLC, period. It may or may not take you out of the other programs. If you're interested in even more, we offer a program here that's designed for people who farm. We've had people come in from out of state who've participated in that. It's several meetings, workshops, and deals with all kinds of management issues. It's on our website if you'd like more on that. We also offer a master's degree. You have to be admitted into the graduate school in order to go that route. But it's there, and agmanager.info is free. If you'd like to receive a note every time we update it, you can get on our mailing list. You can just go to the site anytime you want to. It's one of the few things that we provide without cost. I'm about 10 minutes over, and at this point, but questions that we have out there. Glad to take them. By the way, that's my contact information. Feel free to contact me. Once in a while, we lose emails. So if I don't respond back, you probably got lost in the bureaucracy or me deleting all the junk emails that come through. You've been hearing a lot in the national press about losing emails, but trust me, we managed to do it. Okay.
Art,
How does this? Yeah.
Thank you very much for walking us through all of that. Obviously, there's a lot of complexity, and if I heard the good news about this is that there will be some tools available from both the K-State, Oklahoma State Consortium, and also Texas A&M, and it even sounded there, depends how deep you want to drill here, and a lot more information forthcoming. So again, thanks for getting our feet wet on all of that, if not a little bit more. So first question, and I've got to be very careful in how I read this, but it goes like this. If I grow 100 acres of corn on 100 acres of declared wheat base acres, can I sell my corn at market price? And if the MYA price is lower than the reference price for wheat, can I collect that also?
Yes. It doesn't matter what happens on your farm if the calculated ARC revenue for the wheat base, or if you went into price loss, if the MYA price is lower than 550, and there's a payment due for that wheat base, you are paid on that wheat base. The fact that you planted corn and how you sold it does not matter. And that's what I was saying earlier. You may well be in a position where at least out here, where wheat farmers will have to turn down a ARC wheat payment if they want to buy the additional coverage on the crop that they actually plant, which might be sorghum or corn or something like that, or even canola.
Next question. Will PLC or ARC give me any protection for crops that do not have a PLC reference price? Will they give any protection for crops with PLC reference prices, but I do not have any base acres for them on my farm? So kind of two questions in one, but what's your thought there?
Well, if you don't have base acres, there is no payment, end of story. If I understood the other question, what it sounded like, you're talking about a crop that's a non-program crop. And if it's not one of these program crops, then there is no ARC or PLC program. And in fact, if you're planting a fruit or vegetable on base acres, that takes you out of this payment too.
Okay, continuing with the same listener, if I choose ARC County Trigger on corn and soybeans and PLC on my wheat, can I get SCO on my wheat?
Yes. Yes. The key is that you're not as long as you're not enrolled in ARC or stacks, ARC or stacks, then you're eligible to buy PLC on that crop that you actually plant. Excuse me, you can buy SCO on the crop that you actually plant. You just can't be in ARC or PLC.
Okay, next
Let
question.
me rephrase that. I said that wrong again. You cannot be enrolled in ARC or stacks. If you're not enrolled in ARCs or stacks, then you can buy the supplemental coverage on the crop that's actually planted.
Okay, kind of along the same thread here, if I buy ARC individual coverage, is there any way I can be eligible for SCO on a specialty crop that does not have a reference price?
Okay, you don't buy ARC. That would be the first thing. You're simply eligible for the acres. As for supplemental coverage on non-program crops, I don't know that the program excludes them providing SCO on non-program crops. That's anything where they talk about providing SCO on those crops. So I guess I don't know the answer to that. I don't know that it excludes it. Presumably you could create SCO for crops that are not part of that program crop group. So I guess I don't know for sure how that would come out. Having said all that, there's going to be a lot of program crops, quite frankly, they're not going to have an SCO offer. Initially, what I'm hearing, the only crops they're committing to are corn, soybeans, wheat, sorghum for an SCO offer. Well, I think cotton might be in there too. And then only in about 80% of the counties. So even on those crops, 20% of the counties wouldn't have an SCO offer, at least in the first year.
Okay, that wraps up our questions, and you've covered a great amount of material here, Art. If there are additional questions, you have Art's contact information, or you can email us here at Farm Credit East, and we will get your question to Art. But I want to, I should have tagged on with Art's comment about email getting lost in the shuffle. We have periodically had a few network issues here this morning that have distorted the sound quality, and for the most part, we've been able to listen through that okay. But just like the producers can't control the weather, we can't control the network bandwidth and how that operates. So I do apologize for that, and at least listening here at our Enfield location, we were able to follow the context throughout. So Art, ask you to kind of do a wrap-up statement here. Any general advice you'd like to close on, or anything you'd like to go back and reinforce on before we wrap up the program?
I think the key here is that you can see there are a lot of complex decisions and assumptions, and therefore I think most farmers who are making this decision will want access to some sort of computerized decision aid. If you come on agmanager.info, like all good public land grant universities, we will be telling anybody who wants to listen to us that we now have our spreadsheet available for downloading, and you can either come to our site or the Oklahoma State site and download that. I haven't put anything out there yet. I told people we're working on it, but I don't want to create any demand until we actually have the software finished. I'm scheduled down there next week to work with the folks at OSU on completing the model. And once it's ready to go and we've got it up on the website, trust me, we'll tell everybody. And the good news on this is because it was grant funded, it will not cost the user anything. You can download it from either site without cost.
And we will also, when you're up and running, we will put that link on our Knowledge Exchange site within our website as an additional destination that people can find. It sounds like it's going to be a great tool, and I think I kind of side with you and the Oklahoma State folks that simple and what if is probably better than complex simulation tool, but each to his own on that. Again, I really appreciate you've obviously done a tremendous amount of work on this, showed us a lot of examples, got the jargon and the rules down straight, and we appreciate you walking us through all of that this morning. Look forward to additional information. So again, thank you. With that, we are adjourned.